After celebrating 25 years of RuneScape this year, this will be a new pillar in the franchise. We won't just be known for an MMO, we will have a survival game. Alright, let me show you a Venn diagram. On one side are MMOs, games like RuneScape and World of Warcraft, EVE Online, for those of you who like speedrunning Microsoft Excel. On the other side are survival crafting games, games like Valheim, Subnautica, Palworld, Rust, etc. In the middle there is RuneScape Dragonwilds, which is a new game by the creators of RuneScape, which is a pretty big deal for the company as the first game that's not an MMO set in the RuneScape universe. And also sitting in the middle of that Venn diagram probably makes it a really exciting game to a lot of people. In fact, it's already doing really well. It's been in early access for just over a year, and it's already sold 1.3 million copies before its launch in September. And keep in mind, early access is only on PC. This is a game that's launching on PS5, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch 2 as well. And here's the thing about where I fit into this Venn diagram. It's outside of the Venn diagram. I don't really like MMOs, I don't really like survival crafting games, and I wasn't really expecting to like RuneScape Dragonwilds, if I'm being totally honest with you. But I've always had an idea of what kinds of MMOs I would be into. I always give them a fair shake, and same thing with survival crafting games. I have punched more trees and turned more trees into planks with my bare hands than I can count. That doesn't mean we live in a world where I will never like either genre. For a long time, I didn't like RPGs in general. And then I played Dragon Quest XI, and my whole life changed, and now I mostly only play RPGs. But I think it sometimes takes the right developer matching up with the right genre to go down a path where they end up creating a game that maybe by accident or maybe not, kind of subverts everything and becomes the best entry point for a lot of people. Regardless of how you feel about it, Marathon was that for a lot of people with the extraction shooter. It was for me. I never really enjoyed any extraction shooters before playing Marathon, and there are a lot of people I know who are playing Marathon who have never even heard of the idea of an extraction shooter, even while they're playing it. They just like Marathon. I kind of feel this way about RuneScape Dragonwilds, which is a big surprise to me, because I have played dozens of hours of RuneScape over the years trying to get into it. I keep knocking at the door and seeing if somebody will let me in, and it never really works. It has never really clicked, which is always a bummer because I would love to be a person who likes RuneScape, but just hasn't worked for me. But it turns out that a lot of the stuff that I like about Dragonwilds is actually the stuff that has been pulled directly from RuneScape. So before I talk about that, I should talk about what RuneScape Dragonwilds is, for those of you who maybe don't know. RuneScape Dragonwilds is a survival crafting game that can be played solo or with a group of friends that is set in the RuneScape universe on a new continent called Ashenfall. Ashenfall is this untamed wilderness being lorded over by a bunch of scary dragons, and it's your job to take out the dragons and make sure that Ashenfall is a place where people can build a society. Story-wise, it's loose and honestly uninspiring. There's a bunch of lore books you can read which are actually kind of interesting, but for the most part, I don't think the story is the thing that's going to get you into Dragonwilds. It's mostly going to be the gameplay. And gameplay-wise, it's not so dissimilar from every other survival crafting game you've ever played. You arrive on this continent with nothing, you have to pick up a bunch of rocks and twigs, and you have to turn them into an axe that you can use to chop down trees, and etc., etc. Build a crafting bench, use the crafting bench to build more tools. You've done this before. I've done this before. I did this way back in 2010 when I was playing the alpha of Minecraft with my roommates in college in freshman year, and we stayed up all night for like 4 straight days because we were so blown away by what that game was. It's been 16 years since then, and I feel like every other game these days has some kind of crafting component involved in it. So RuneScape Dragonwilds is not really coming from a place where I think it stands out immediately. The differentiators in Dragonwilds comes down to 2 key things. Number 1 is skills. Number 2 is magic. And there's a third thing, which I think is kind of a secret sauce that binds the whole thing together, but I'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about skills. RuneScape is a game where you run around and you click on stuff, and people like it. In RuneScape, the more stuff you click on and the more times you click on those things, the higher your skill values get. All of these skills go up to 99, I think. I don't know because I haven't played RuneScape that much, but I think it's 99. So if you fish a lot, your fishing skill will continue to go up. If you cut down a lot of trees, your wood cutting skill will continue to go up, etc., etc. That idea, very Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion adjacent, exists basically exactly in RuneScape Dragonwilds. The difference in RuneScape Dragonwilds is that instead of just clicking on a tree, you're running up to it with an axe and hitting the attack button over and over and over again until the tree falls over, and then when it's on the ground, you cut that tree into smaller logs, and then cut those logs into smaller logs, and then you cut those logs into even smaller logs, and then those logs you can cut into logs that you can use to build stuff. It sounds tedious, and it is. until you level up the woodcutting skill. This is one of the smarter things about this game because you're going to be doing this stuff a lot, but as you continue to do it, it becomes easier. So when you continue to level up your woodcutting skill, the chance of a critical hit on a tree or a log will increase. The same thing is true for building. The same thing is true for fishing. The same thing is true for attacking with your weapon or shooting an enemy with a bow and arrow, etc., etc. All of these things constitute different skills which will all level up and become easier over time. But the real oomph, the real thing that I think makes Dragonwilds great is that every once in a while, on these skill trees, you'll unlock magic spells that you can use to make things like trivially easy. Take, for example, Astral Projection, which is one of the first spells you'll learn, which allows you to take a ghostly axe and throw it through a bunch of trees, and it will just knock them down immediately. Another skill called Rocksplosion allows you to run up to a bunch of rocks on the ground and just cast a little bomb that blows all of them up and turns them into stone that you can then, again, use to build stuff. What I like about these spells is that it doesn't remove the manual process of needing to gather resources. There's still a lot you have to do. Rocksplosion takes these rocks and turns them into smaller stones that you can use to build stuff, but you still need to go find an outcropping of rocks somewhere and blow them up. Astral Projection is kind of interesting because it only knocks the trees over. You still need to go up with your axe and cut them all down individually into smaller logs that you can use. So if you're coming into these games because you like that rote feeling, that almost monotonous feeling of continuing to do the same task over and over again, which a lot of people do, there's a coziness in that. I like that they kind of give you a little bit of a shortcut to make things a little bit easier, but they don't remove that monotony. And I think that's kind of necessary to feel like the world is immersive, to feel like it's a place that you actually live in. When you build a house out of the logs you chop down a forest to get, you feel a sense of accomplishment from doing that. And having a spell that knocks down those trees doesn't really change that feeling of accomplishment if you still need to chop all those trees into smaller pieces to make that house down the line. A quick side note, this is actually also one of my favorite things about an upcoming game called Fields of Mystria, which is coming out in August. Fields of Mystria is kind of a take on Stardew Valley, but in a fantasy world that allows you to use magic to circumvent a lot of the monotony and manual tasks that you would normally have to do in Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley is a game I respect a lot, but have never really loved. Fields of Mystria I played when it launched in early access and fell in love with immediately for almost exactly the same reason. Spells are just a way of skipping the stuff that might be boring to you so you can get to the stuff that's not boring to you faster. Like relationships with the people in town. Ooh. All of these skills and these magic spells creates a loop where you feel like you're constantly getting distracted in a fun way by the possibility space that Dragonwilds gives you. You might fall down a rabbit hole of base building and level up your building skill by accident along the way, but while doing that, you're still going to be leveling up your woodcutting skill and your mining skill so you can get all of the different materials you'll need to build that house in the first place. But in the process of doing all of that, you might accidentally unlock some new materials, which allows you to build a fishing net, which unlocks the fishing skill, which then sends you down a different rabbit hole where all you do is fish, like everybody who's ever played any game that has fishing in it. And all of that would make for a pretty good video game by itself, but there's a whole fantasy RPG side of this that I haven't even really talked about, because there is a story here. You're being sent out on quests, and you're dungeon crawling, and you're getting into combat a lot. The combat feels surprisingly good, like way better than any MMO I've ever played. Not that this is an MMO, but put a pin in that for later. But when I hit something with my bow, like I feel it. When I block an attack or do a perfect parry, it feels like there's weight there. That's not a thing I'm really used to in games like this, but the further into Dragonwilds you get, the more kind of absurd it gets as they start to overwhelm you with tougher enemies, and you need to be a little bit more light on your feet and using your abilities a little bit more. From what I understand, this combat changed very recently. At the time of this video, they released a combat overhaul that came out I think only 3 weeks ago, so this is a relatively new feeling. I think if you watched older videos about Dragonwilds, they would probably say something very different than the combat is good, but the combat is good. The place where the combat is not good, if I'm being honest though, is definitely in the magic side of things. As much as I love the magic in the crafting and the survival side of Dragonwilds, I'm not such a big fan of needing to bring up this big magic wheel while I'm mid-combat with a bunch of goblins to try to cast a shield spell when I could just hold my shield up instead. It just doesn't feel reliable enough or fast enough to be really usable, which is kind of a bummer considering how much of a focus there is on magic in this game. I do think there is a little bit of work that can be done on the magic side when it comes to combat. But all of this leads me to the third bit, that secret sauce I talked about earlier, which is just the exploration side of Dragonwilds, which is actually the thing that's pulling me in more than anything else. As much as I love building my base and farming and just watching numbers go up in general, what I love even more is walking out into the world and just seeing what's available, seeing what's out there. This is one of the few open world games I've played recently where I don't really have an idea of what could be around any corner. Maybe if you've played RuneScape, you would have a better idea because you know more about the possibility space of the RuneScape universe, but I sure don't. So I'm finding myself surprised pretty often by the things I'm finding out there, like when I find a dungeon to crawl through or when I find a big horde of goblins that seem to be like around maybe a destroyed mage's college or something. Or when I get attacked by a dragon in the middle of a swamp, or when I get attacked by poison rats in the middle of a swamp, or when I get attacked by whatever this thing is in the middle of a swamp. I find it surprising and I find it fun, and I've died a lot, and that's also kind of fun because when you die, you drop all of your stuff. You have to run back and try to pick it all up at the gravestone that it drops when you die. I think there's a sense of challenge here, and there's a sense of like wading out of your depth. And it's both fun to overcome, but difficult to overcome. So it feels all the more cathartic and rewarding when you finally do. Can I just vent for a second about maybe my biggest pet peeve in video games? And this is in the survival crafting genre specifically. It's hunger and thirst meters. When games have hunger and thirst meters, I check out immediately. When they added a hunger meter to Minecraft, dear viewer, I stopped playing Minecraft. Like, I was done with the video game from that moment onwards. RuneScape Dragonwilds has hunger and thirst meters, and boy, did I think that was going to be it for me. I thought I was going to bail. I decided to push through, and I am pleased to report I think they've done a good job here. First of all, the meters don't drop that quickly, so I think it's pretty lenient on that front. When you drink water or when you eat some food, it refills the meters pretty significantly, which is also nice. And they do this really nice thing where when you're by your base or your bed, all the meters drop slower, which I think is really nice because you're cozy. It's literally a coziness meter. I think that's cute. With every open world game set in a fantasy universe, I always want to kind of experience that D&D, Lord of the Rings-y kind of feeling, you know, where I'm just a person wandering out into the wilderness and seeing what's around every cliff, rock, corner, etc. I want to be surprised and delighted by the things that I come across. I want to be rewarded for my curiosity, and Dragonwilds is giving me all of that, which I really love. And to be clear, I'm still in the first area of the game somehow. As long as the game's been in early access, they've been adding new regions to Ashenfall over time, and I haven't even seen the second one yet. That's pretty cool. I'm excited to see the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one, and whatever they add when the game finally comes out in 1.0. I think that this game is going to have a long life ahead of it. But that long life is the thing that I'm most curious about, because over time, the more I've played it, the more I realized if this game was an MMO, like if there were hundreds of people all around me running around Ashenfall along with me, I think it would be my favorite MMO. And by that I mean it would be the only one that I've ever truly liked. Or even loved, maybe. We'll see after a couple dates. I've jumped in and out of MMOs throughout my life. I played World of Warcraft. I played Guild Wars 1 and 2. I played a game, I think it's called WildStar. I kind of liked WildStar. The only MMOs I ever truly loved were Destiny and Destiny 2, and before you go into the comments and tell me that those aren't MMOs, I agree with you. They're kind of they're like MMO light, I would say. Those games took a lot of what worked about the MMO genre and applied it to a first-person shooter and made something that was similar to, but not exactly, an MMO, and it was extremely successful and kind of is still extremely successful. The thing that always really struck me about Destiny is that I was able to chip away at so much of the like ancient necessities that people felt the MMO genre needed to include. One question I always have when I'm playing MMOs is, why are they all like this? Like, why does every MMO need a toolbar of actions and 15 different screens on top of the video game? I don't need all these windows. Not every game needs to look like this, and if you continue to make games that look like this, all you're doing is competing with the many other games that look like this. Destiny was able to take a lot of what worked about MMOs, like the social features, and the looting, and the dungeon crawling, and the raids, and basically streamline it into a game that anyone could play, similar to what Bungie has done again with Marathon and the extraction shooter. A lot of people playing Destiny didn't even really consider it an MMO at the time, but it kind of was. And it's kind of the weird irony of that quote from Rick Turek over at Jagex. Yes, RuneScape Dragonwilds is not an MMO. I agree with that. But you took a team that is extremely proficient at making MMOs and had them make something else. What they actually made was an MMO that's just not MM. It's just one M. It's just a multiplayer online game. But also, by not being beholden to being an MMO, I think they've actually solved a lot of my problems with MMOs. And if there's a world in which RuneScape Dragonwilds suddenly supports 50,000 people playing at the same time, I think I'd like it. I know there's a lot of people who don't want that, and Jagex themselves seem to be excited about charting this new path away from the MMO genre and expanding RuneScape into other genres of video game. But that doesn't stop me from wondering what RuneScape Dragonwilds can teach me about what I would want from an eventual MMO. And I feel like they're kind of knocking on the door of it. They've created the foundation upon which you could build that house if you wanted to. This is already a game where you can play with up to 4 players or 6 players on dedicated servers, but if you make your own server, hypothetically, you could bump that number up as much as you wanted. The question is, does the game support it? I think servers will support it, but will the game itself support the weight of having that many people in one game? That's the thing I'm more curious about. In that way, Dragonwilds has the potential, I think, to kind of serve everybody simultaneously, because they've said very plainly that they want it to be able to be played solo, which I can attest to, because I've only played it solo so far. You can play it with friends, but maybe down the line, they could do a little bit of work to allow people to play on MMO servers if they want to, and they can kind of have their cake and eat it too. Because the core of Dragonwilds, the actual game itself, is giving me everything I want out of an MMO experience. When I play something like Guild Wars or World of Warcraft or whatever, I want to feel immersed in a world that is alive. And Dragonwilds is giving me all of that, just without the added social layer on top of it. I think this argument about will Dragonwilds become an MMO or not is kind of missing the bullseye in the center of the dartboard. The bullseye is, it can be if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be, because what they built so far is a game that takes everything you love about MMOs, but puts you in the driver's seat, makes you feel like you have more action and intention in the world as you hit a tree with your axe over and over again, or perfect parry a goblin's blow with its dagger. And it took away or hid the million little windows that are on screen at any given time, and the action toolbar at the bottom. It made the whole thing playable with a controller, and it's gonna come out on PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo Switch, along with PC. And that feels like the evolution of MMOs to me. And that's what's so exciting about Dragonwilds the more I play of it. So when the developers say that Dragonwilds is proof that they're not just an MMO company, I guess my question is, how far down the roadmap do we have to go before that's not true anymore? Because by all accounts, what they've built is a genuinely great MMO that just drops all of the baggage that comes along with the genre. All right, that's gonna be it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed to the channel already. Thank you so much to the patrons for making videos like this possible. And if you wanna join the Patreon, you can go do that and see 3 hours of me playing this game, RuneScape Dragonwilds. You can see my first hour and a half as I try to figure out what the game even is, and then about 7 hours later when I fully know what the game is. All right, bye.